I wasn't one of those people that knew exactly what they wanted to do when they were younger, but I feel like I've ended up where I want to be.
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner Sharon Sutton.
So welcome to this week's Island Influencers. And my guest this week is Sarah Comish, the newly appointed General Secretary of the Manx National Farmers Union. Sarah talks to me about life growing up on her family's farm in the Isle of Man, her love of art, horses, walking, and Elizabeth Taylor. She explains how travelling extensively around India changed her life, encouraging her to be more confident and less cautious. Sarah shares stories of her 10 years in the film industry within the set dressing and props department. Her favourite film to work on was Waking Ned, featuring her cousin's pony. Returning to the island when her mum sadly passed away, she decided to stay. Sarah has since raised a family whilst juggling several jobs, including being One World Charity Challenge Project Officer, Secretary at Isle of Man Southern District Agricultural Show, running the agricultural show, whilst also being on the local planning committee. This episode provides a great insight into the agricultural and farming world and Sarah's commitment and passion for sustainable development and how that affects all our futures. Here's this week's conversation with Sarah Comish in episode 60 of Island Influencers. Welcome, Sarah Comish, brand newly installed General Secretary of the Manx National Farmers Union. Welcome to Island Influencers. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks for asking me.
No, well, we've met a few times over the years, haven't we, at various agricultural shows? But when did you got put in post? When did you get into post at the NFU?
Well, I've been sort of transitioning since June, when Andy left at the end of June.
Yeah.
But then July obviously was taken up with organising the agricultural show. So I finished the agricultural show at the end of July, and then I came into office full time officially on the 5th of August.
Which is right before the Royal Show, isn't it?
Yeah.
yeah. You know how to transition at a quiet time, you thought.
I thought it'd be quiet. No, it's been very busy, but then it's been a very busy year, really.
Oh yeah. I'm sure. Well, thanks for making the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate that. But, for the benefit of all our listeners, what we normally do is we just find out all about our guests. And so, if you could just tell us, Sarah, about your background, which has brought you to here today.
Farming.
Well, so you're Isle of Man born, like me.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
Family's been in the same area for a very long period of time, like a lot of farming families on the Isle of Man.
Yeah.
So I was brought up in the Greneby Ronnig area in Aubrey. My dad and his brother shared the farm in Ronnig, and Dad took on Ballamadrel Farm tenancy when I was born. So we've pretty much been there our whole lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what sort of farming did he do? What does he do?
Originally, they were dairy farming, and then I think that they made a decision somewhere along the line that they would probably give up the dairy farming. I do remember childhoods being dominated by Dad, always having to get back for milking wherever we went.
Gosh.
And then they moved into beef farming, and then Dad eventually, when they went their separate ways to do their own thing, Dad was mainly concentrated on sheep.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a bit more light touch than having to milk a dairy herd twice a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, the dairy herd is a commitment that you absolutely don't get a day off from unless you've got help. Beef farming and sheep farming, it still gets pretty intensive, but with the sheep, you could certainly, at least take some time off if some of us were left behind to look after them for him.
Gosh. Yeah, you kind of forget. I don't know, many of us townies have got absolutely no idea about the life of a farmer and the all the people in the agricultural sector, other than, I suppose, for me, I learned a huge amount by watching Clarkson's Farm on Amazon.
It was brilliant. I never thought I was going to like that series.
No, I didn't.
But it's absolutely fantastic. I think he's done so much for farming. It kind of inadvertently, he's really opened people's eyes to what it's like. And I think I appreciated watching that series. I appreciated the fact that he didn't make fun of farming. He made fun of himself, and he did it very well, but he certainly didn't make fun of farming and what it's like as a challenge, especially these days.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, I think anybody who watched that, because just a real reality check. So you went to school here, obviously, and
I went to Albury School. Again, we're one of those families that didn't move much, so I think it was ourselves and the Lowies were the families that had the most generations of the family going to the same school.
That's pretty good.
And then so we were all at Albury. There was 4 of us, and we all went to Albury, and then we all went on to Castle Rushen. Yeah.
Did you go into uni after that? Did you do a degree or?
I did. Yeah, and I was actually, when I was growing up, I wasn't actually involved in the farm in the fact that it wasn't something I'd planned on doing myself or taking on. I did art.
Yeah, so you saw your path down some career directed or connected with art. What did you want to do?
I'd always been, I was one of those kids, I was always drawing. I was always sort of painting pictures and drawing and everything like that. So I've always been quite a creative person. And I went on to the Isle of Man College and I did the foundation course there. And then I found that I really enjoyed ceramics. So I went away to Falmouth School of Art. It was School of Art at the time, and I went and did ceramics. Yeah.
Blimey.
I know, yeah. So it was kind of unexpected. Probably my life has taken different paths and I've always ended up coming back to the same place.
Yeah. So what happened when you did ceramics? What happened after that? Did you get a job in ceramics or?
Yeah, I suppose we were a family where we didn't always there wasn't a lot of money, and I think we were pretty similar to a lot of families in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
Whether you were farming or whether you were just a working class family, there really wasn't a lot of money around for people. So Mum and Dad did quite a lot to enable me to go to college. But when I came back, of course, I just had to stop working, So I did. I found work. I worked for Kegs Photographers for a little while, and then I went to work for a friend doing conferencing work and presentations and things like that, it was quite a nice little job. And then after that, I was a bit restless, really. I really enjoyed my time at college. And I really wanted to travel. So, we went travelled out to India.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved that. And I have to say, one of the most confident, because I was never the most confident person. So travelling out to India and realising I could do it gave me a lot of confidence.
Who did you go with?
I went with a boyfriend at the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But what I actually realised when we were travelling was that I was very good at managing on money.
Okay, good.
I know. It doesn't sound very exciting and exotic, but there you go. But I actually had a fantastic time out there. I absolutely love India.
Well, if you control your costs, you can have a great time.
Yeah. One thing I refused to do was stay anywhere that was too cheap. I don't really want to rough it.
No. Well, why would you?
No, but no, we had a fantastic time travelling. It was great. It was a really good experience for me coming from the Isle of Man to go somewhere like that.
Yeah. What particularly did you like about India?
Oh, people.
Yeah.
I love the way they approach their lives. They're incredibly resilient and they're incredibly resourceful. They've found a way to, because it's so densely populated, they've found a way to cope with that, living alongside each other, and I just thought they were amazing.
In terms of multi-generational, is that what you mean? Or?
That, but also on a social level, they were quite symbiotic in the way they made things work. You know, everybody had their place and their thing to do, and there was an incredible structure of job creation, which I thought was really impressive. You know, everybody had one particular little job to do.
Right.
Yeah, I thought it was an amazing place, and it's so varied and different as you travel around it. I mean, you encounter all sorts of things, and no day is a dull day. You know, something always happens.
So how long did you spend there?
I think we were out there for about 6 months, I think.
In India?
Yeah, we travelled around for 6 months, yeah.
And which was your favourite part? Because it's quite diverse, India. It's a huge place, isn't it?
Yeah, I really liked Calcutta, and I really liked Darjeeling as well. I really liked those places. They were quite something, yeah. There's an amazing kind of, especially in Calcutta and Darjeeling, I found that old colonialism, what that had left behind and the structure that had left behind, I thought that was really interesting, how it kind of evolved with the Indian community. Yeah. How they'd meshed it all together in their own way, Yeah.
Can you kind of, having been out in that part of the world, which is not too far away from Pakistan and Afghanistan, see that there's quite a wide range of different religions that, I mean, how do they all get on?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. They kind of, for the most part, certainly in India, they coexist. We did go into Kashmir and Srinagar, and I have to say, actually, that was one of the most beautiful experiences ever. And we went in there very sort of innocently as well.
Probably helped.
It probably did. We didn't really know what we were doing. We just sort of ended up there. The bizarre thing was that there was a lull in the fighting. In the 2 weeks that we were there, there was no fighting. And after we left, it started again. That was kind of lucky.
Maybe you have hidden diplomatic skills there, Sarah. Your effect on... where am I? Can you help?
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, maybe it's just a bit of total innocence going into it. But it was one of the most beautiful places. It was really quite something. And the people were fantastic. You know, it's a very Muslim community, and they were absolutely fantastic. Then you go all the way to the south of India, and you've got a very Christian community. Yeah. So, yeah, it's incredibly diverse and interesting. I think there are other areas around India, and certainly on the border of Kashmir and everything, where there are struggles and stuff, but that's not something we personally encountered.
Yeah, interesting. So you came back from travelling.
Where did I go next?
Yeah, well, what happened? I mean, did it change you, do you think, your outlook, having had experience there? In what way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely became more confident and less cautious about what I was doing in a good way. I felt a lot more positive about life and what you could achieve in life and you know, what your motivations are. I think
and for specifically in the Isle of Man, do you mean? Or
just anywhere you go. I think coming from the Isle of Man, you grow up with a little bit of quiet confidence about your place in the world. And I think I've always had that because I've always known that I really belong here. But Manx people like to travel and they like to see things and they like to go off and do different things. And I think, it certainly gave me a lot of confidence when I came back.
Yeah. And that affected what your choices that you made when you did come home?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'm not sure whether I made any definite choices in my 20s. I ended up working in the film industry for about 10 years.
Gosh.
Which sounds really exciting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it does. Who did you meet? Who's the most famous person you met during that time? Patrick Swayze?
Oh, David Bowie.
David Bowie?
No, yeah, I was. I did. That's the only time I got a little bit starstruck by meeting anyone, was when I met David Bowie. I kind of stopped speaking, looked at the floor. But the rest it gets quite sort of laid back, that side of it.
What did you do? You were more than an extra, I take it, in what you were doing.
Yeah, I worked with a friend, Sally Black, who did a lot in the film industry, and I was quite often her assistant, and I sort of took it from there. So it was mostly in the art department, set dressing, props buying, Fantastic. All of that. Loved it. I really loved it.
Which films did you work on?
One of the first ones we worked on was Waking Ned. And I loved that. And
that was an amazing film. So funny. For anybody who hasn't seen it, it is the most hilariously brilliant film, and it showcases the island, although not quite correctly geographically, I would say.
No, it doesn't match up. What was quite funny was when people did go and watch it at the cinema, they were like, well, you can't get from there to there.
Exactly.
My God, they're in St John's now. So no, people living locally, obviously, we're kind of picking it apart that way. But that's the way films work, really. You know, you just match up your locations to suit the film. And it's always quite funny being behind the camera. And when I watch films now, I'm always like, you look at what you're watching and you know that there's a whole heap of people behind that camera that are probably standing around.
You see that in the credits at the end. They go on for like years, don't they?
There's loads of us.
Yeah.
We did a TV series in Manchester once. It always gave me the giggles because we ended up, Tom Conti was in it, and they were marching down the corridors. They were these detectives and they were marching down a corridor, and there's a whole heap of film crew all behind the camera, all shuffling backwards down this corridor. I mean, you know, you've got to be there sometimes, but it is funny when you know what it's like around that particular scene. You know what's going on.
It's fascinating. It's a shame it kind of came to an end, really.
Yeah, I think it is. I think for a time, the Isle of Man was a very good location. But whatever was going on in the financial structure of it, I wasn't really conscious of that. I was, you know, I'd found quite an interesting little job to do. And I kept on doing that. On island, we did go off island a little bit as well and do different things. But on island was my favourite, probably because it was such familiar territory. And
you go home at night.
Also, I could always get asked. I could be asked for things and I could find them. On Waking Ned, I got asked to go and find a horse. The last minute.
Yeah.
And I sort of went, okay. And I ran off up the hill and I borrowed my cousin's pony and I brought it back down. What actually happened was we were at Craigneish and they said, we want a horse for this scene. You know, we want Jimmy Nesbitt's character to be leading a horse.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And they said, Sarah, could you find a horse? And I was like, yeah, okay. So I ran off and I got the farm horse and I brought that back and he went, oh no, that's too big. And I was like, okay.
Be more specific.
I put that back in the field and went off up the road and I said to my cousin Danny, who was living at the top, I said, can I borrow little Maisie? She said, yeah, okay. So brought little Maisie back down the road and said to the director, right, what about this one? And he went, yeah, that's perfect. So she became Jimmy Nesbitt's little pony. And I swear to God, that pony had never been in front of all those lights and people and cameras and everything before in her life. And she was brilliant, which was lucky.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it could have been a complete nightmare, couldn't it? Oh, great. That's a fab story. What did you get on to next? There was a stint in planning, I believe.
Well, yeah. I kind of I worked in the film industry until I realised I was going to have a baby. So I had Jessica. I thought at that point, you know what? Having children changes absolutely everything. And I didn't really want to do those kind of 72-hour weeks that you do in the film industry when I've got a baby. I thought, no, if I have a baby, I want to spend time with the baby and my children. Yeah. So that did change things a lot. So I just ended up doing bits and pieces then as Jessica was growing up. Heidi came along. Well, Jessica was born in 2004. Then in 2006, I was living in London at the time with my partner, who's now my husband, Chris. And then in 2006, my mum died very suddenly.
Oh dear, sorry.
So I came back here. And when I came back here, I just said to my husband, I said, right, I'm staying here. I just said, right, that's it. I'm staying here with Dad and you'll have to decide whether you're coming with me. Kind of put him on the spot a bit. And he moved here and he's very happy here, luckily.
That is lucky. That is lucky.
Yeah. So, after that, I just did bits and pieces. And then Heidi came along in 2010. At that point, I took on the Southern Agricultural Show, which I was really pleased with because, of course, it's been part of our family for generations. Again, there's a lot of people involved in the agricultural shows that their families have been doing it for generations. Yeah. So I was really pleased to get that job. Yeah, and I did that for 10 years because it was only part-time. As the girls were growing up, I needed a few more things to do. So I took on a couple of other things. I found out that they were looking for planning committee members about 5 years ago, and I thought, I'd love to do that. Yeah. And I gave it a try. And I got invited onto the committee and I've really enjoyed that time.
Yeah, you learn a lot from it.
Learn a lot. Yeah. It's a really interesting process. And I think it's a really good thing to do because you start to understand the whole process and not just your own perspective on things. You know, whether I agreed with other people or not, that wasn't the relevant part of it. It was understanding the whole process. You know,
yeah. I think you just described the central tenet of actually civilization, really.
Yeah.
You know, if ever we could do that, we'd all live in harmony, wouldn't we? We could all understand it.
yeah. It's not always easy. But I've always thought, you know, my view on things is always that it's about getting the right results from things. It's not about my opinion mattering more than someone else's.
Yeah.
So, yeah, being on the planning committee was really, at times it was a bit challenging, and I didn't always agree with everyone else. They're probably, if they ever heard this, they'd be laughing. But the whole process and understanding the planning process I found really fascinating.
Yeah.
I thought it was great.
Yeah.
And I thought they were a great bunch of people in planning. I know how much work they put in.
Yeah, and your perspective as well from being from the agricultural sector was a voice that they perhaps didn't have.
Yeah, I think it was quite helpful. I think it was helpful for them to understand how things actually are in agriculture. You know, what you really need in order to be able to support agriculture. So that helped a lot. And it was interesting for me to see other people's views on agriculture, because that's always good, because you don't want to live in too much of a bubble of your own opinion.
Well, their perception is their reality, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so I always found that, you know, that was a really interesting part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, congratulations on having done that. And is it a voluntary role?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
You obviously get paid an allowance for meetings, but basically you get the reports the week before, and you don't know how many applications are going to be on the report, and you just try and do as much research as you can in the week running up to the meeting. Always interesting. Yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah. And so the Southern Show, what did you enjoy about that?
I keep coming around full circle back to farming again. I really enjoyed working within the farming community. They're an incredibly well-connected group amongst themselves, but a part of the Southern Show I really like is putting out farming and what goes on in farming out to everybody on the island, and including them in that, and giving people the chance to come along and see stuff they don't normally see. I love the tradition of it. I think the agricultural shows have pretty much stayed true to the tradition of what they started out to achieve. Yeah.
What was the main goal, though?
It's the promotion of livestock and breeding quality and innovations in farming and agriculture. So the exhibitors, it's more difficult these days for people to exhibit animals. In certain areas, the numbers have definitely dropped down, and that's because the structure of farming changes. The agricultural shows are a reflection of what's going on in farming.
You've got an example of that?
Certainly the dairy section.
Yeah,
it's quite a challenge for them. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for, especially I think for the cattle sections generally, for the dairy and the beef, because methods have changed over the years. You know, in the beef sections, you get a lot of calves would be bucket reared in the past, so they would be easier to handle in the show ring. Dairy are a little bit
okay.
The dairy, yeah, they really do.
So you really have to be strong to hang on to them then.
They tend to, people that are showing tend to look at animals. It goes all year round, and they tend to look at animals when they're very young to see if they're going to be suitable for the show ring, and start training them when they're small. Because it kind of sounds obvious, but you know, trying to train something that's as big as they get.
Apart from a pony in a field that just is pretty good in front of the camera.
Yeah. So it does take it. People do invest an awful lot of time in it, and they do it. I think a lot of people do it just because they just love doing it. Over our lifetimes, we've exhibited cattle and sheep and horses and even poultry. You know, so we've kind of it's something you just do because you really love doing it.
I suppose it's a celebration of excellence in the sector, is it? When you win something, I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, it still carries that sort of, you know, that badge of honour that it's a really special thing.
Front page of the Examiner.
Yeah.
It's a green champion is.
It is. You know, and as far as, you know, your breeding stock goes, it's a good message to put out there.
Okay.
It's another reason why we always like to bring over UK judges, because it lets people in the UK know what kind of stock is here as well. So it's always a good advert for the Isle of Man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can judge yourself against the UK, presumably, on that basis. If they're judging it to a similar standard. That's
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think also it's got quite an important message, and the agricultural shows do this. There's a big message there for local produce and the value of local produce. It's not just monetary terms, but the value of it when it comes to contributing to the care of our environment and to all of our climate change issues. You know, being able to locally produce food that doesn't have to travel halfway around the world to the highest welfare standards that are available, you know, it has to say a lot for the Isle of Man.
I guess that leads straight on to your newest role then.
Yeah, which is why, which is it's kind of what led me on to the union. Really, is I knew that with my girls growing up, I wanted to take on more work, and what I ended up doing was I was doing the agricultural show, which was part-time. I did planning committee, which I thoroughly enjoyed as well. And I also took on a project that sort of runs from September to March with secondary schools for the One World Centre. And that was Charity Challenge.
Great.
So it's a little bit different from what I've been doing, but it's all about sustainable development. And working on sustainable development goals and charities that are locally based that work overseas, helping other places develop sustainably.
Gosh.
So they can stand on their own 2 feet, basically.
Does that have any reflection on your time in India, do you think?
Possibly. Again, I'm probably drawn to more social issues. I certainly feel very strongly about sustainable development and how that affects our futures.
Yeah.
And that we cannot continue consuming on the levels that we're doing, and the effects it has on the global markets and the economy and everything like that. I think that it's really important that we start to address those issues. Charity Challenge was a learning curve for me as much as it was for the students.
Right.
It certainly opened my eyes to what work people are doing in other countries, people from the Isle of Man, the work they're doing overseas to support other communities is quite impressive.
Fantastic. Well, if you could send us the links to that, we'll include that resource in the show notes so listeners can have a look at that.
Absolutely. It's a brilliant project, and some of the students that got involved in it, they're just incredible. Well, all of them were brilliant, actually. So they really are, because they take it on because they really want to do it, and you'll know from Junior Achievement, it's a very similar sort of thing.
We had our Junior Achievement show. They won the ones we sponsored, funny enough, our company, and that was a Elevate paper
brilliant.
soap. What a great idea!
I've got some of it at home.
Yeah, I've got some here in the bag. I'm going to take it to the team in the office at some point.
Yeah, really good. No, they're really impressive, and you can learn a lot from them all. Really, yeah.
No, that's super. No, thank you. Well, so I mean, thanks so much for sharing all that, Sarah. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, I do ask every guest for this because it reflects in my day job, which is a financial planner. So, what was your earliest memory of money? I mean, how was money growing up? I mean, you mentioned before in farming it was, you know, your mum and dad had to make a lot of sacrifices and do stuff. I mean, so how did you see that?
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of money. I think a lot of the smaller farms in the Isle of Man, most of them there wasn't a lot of money. There still isn't, I don't think.
No,
I think that, profit margins are always narrow. But I don't think it affected our quality of life at all, because if we didn't have it, we didn't miss it. So I suppose my approach to money is that I think it's important to have that financial security, which we've sort of created for ourselves, but it doesn't dominate my life to the point where everything else doesn't matter. It's more important for me to have a strong family connection with everybody, and for that to be really important. I think what my mum always taught us as girls, because there's 3 girls and 1 boy in the family, is that we had to be financially independent. And that's something I keep passing on to my girls, is that you make your own path in life and you don't depend on anyone for anything. And that's probably been the most important thing for me, is that I'm not actually dependent on anyone else. So I don't have to be with somebody for financial reasons. I'm there because I want to be there. And that's probably the most important thing. That's something that Mum always said, be financially independent. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. So of all the things you've done so far in your life, what's been the most fulfilling? I mean, you can say it from a personal business perspective if you want, or just...
I think it's really difficult to say one particular thing. I mean, meeting my stepdaughter and growing a relationship with her has been wonderful. Having my own 2 girls has been amazing. Family is really important.
Yeah.
But I've really enjoyed my kind of like, at times, kind of twisty path on my career. I never really planned on a career. I wasn't one of those people that knew exactly what they wanted to do when they were younger. But I feel like I've ended up really where I want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like it. Yeah. I'm excited for the future in the union. It sounds great. So what do you do to relax when you're not juggling a couple of jobs and families and the like? Well, what's relaxation look like for Sarah?
Oh, I love long walks, horses. Always loved horses. I know they keep coming back.
Are you still on the lookout for any more budding film stars now?
No, I still love painting and drawing and things, and if I get time, I'll really like doing something a bit creative.
Yeah, you're using that to good effect in the union?
Not yet. I've got plans though.
Have you? Enjoy looking at a refresh of the agricultural show tent, the displays there perhaps. Fantastic. What do you think are the best things about living in the Isle of Man?
Oh, I think everything's wonderful about the Isle of Man. I genuinely do.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world.
No.
I think it's just a really unique and beautiful and wonderful place to live. And I think the Isle of Man is in such a good position that we might not change the world by what we do here when it comes to climate change and everything, but I think the example we can set to the rest of the world is a really powerful message, and I think that's what we should be doing. That's what we should be aiming for.
Would you say that's the main challenge that the island faces? So we are on the cusp. I don't know when this recording will go out, but we're on the cusp of a general election.
Yeah.
Previous administration, the one that's leaving, they, according to another podcast guest, haven't been very proactive on climate change. Do you see that as one of the main challenges that we?
I think it's
and what
a
will we
source
do?
Of frustration.
And what we're going to do about it?
That I think you'll probably find a lot of people will feel the same way, in that we need to actually do something now. The talking's been done.
Yeah.
The consultations really have been done, although we've got another one coming up. It is time to get proactive about it and start doing something.
So what solutions and opportunities are there, do you think, then?
I think there's a lot of opportunities. I think farming is going to play a key role. I think people need to be educated. I think it needs to be part of our school curriculums about climate change, what's happening. Food, which is really important. Food security for the Isle of Man is exceptionally important. Climate change is going to change food production around the world. There's no doubt about it. So what we've had in plentiful, cheap supply is not going to be anymore.
Brexit scored us as much as anything.
Absolutely it did. Yeah. And I think that there are issues with climate change that are affecting people's ability to grow food. So education around food production, I think, is really important for people to understand. And it helps them make more informed choices about what they buy and how they shop. So I think there's loads of things that can actually be initiated now. I know the union's been working on projects for carbon sequestration. I'm kind of picking up on the tail end of some of the projects that the union's been doing.
Yeah. And is Andy, your predecessor, now having moved to DEFRA, is he going to be a good ally there to help see some of the projects that he's been going on about for years? Yeah.
the union's got quite a good communication connection with DEFRA.
Fantastic.
And that really helps.
Yeah.
It's really important that we all communicate, and they've been quite good at that. Yeah, it helps having Andy there because he's very familiar with what's been going on in the union in the past few years, isn't he? And what the situation is like for farming and what kind of support it needs. I think we could use our resources a lot better than we have been doing. There's lots of ways that farming contribute to this programme, but people do need to understand that it has to be run at a profit, otherwise it's not going to happen.
That goes to the heart of the value of money, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Value and cost not being the same thing.
No, and I think that there's been a bit of a misconception about farming for quite a few generations. I think that maybe there's been a little bit of a divide between farming and the rest of the community, which we're always trying to bridge with the agricultural shows and the union and everything, and educate people a little bit more on it. And I think that kind of the misconception about farming is that farmers are getting money for nothing. And it's not true. People need to understand the economics of food production and the global competition we've got. The cost of producing food on the Isle of Man is much higher. Global imports are cheaper. They're produced to different levels.
But at what cost? Environmentally.
Environmentally, and for the welfare of animals, at what cost? So it's a complicated story. I think there's been quite a lot of progress this year in that the Manx Wildlife Trust, they're very proactive.
Yes.
And they're working with the Manx National Farmers Union now.
Fantastic.
To roll out the agricultural environment scheme.
Yes.
That's started and it's quite exciting.
Yeah.
And I think what's been good for the Wildlife Trust to see is that farms are keen on the project, as long as they can retain some profitability in the business, because nobody would run a business if it wasn't profitable.
Well, it's not business then, is it?
Exactly. So it has to have profit in it. And if that means subsidising it, then that's the way it has to be, because, otherwise you cannot compete in the global market. But the benefits that'll have on the biodiversity of the Isle of Man and our wildlife is hopefully going to be a really positive one.
Yeah.
And then we can take that forward into considerations about climate change.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds like a good story. So what's planned next? What particular action is going to happen in the next? Anything you can say?
Well, we're hoping to have some roadshows for farmers in early October, giving them a bit more information about the AES and about it's the Agri-Environment Scheme.
Okay.
It comes along from the Agricultural Development Scheme. That's been reduced, and the Agricultural Environment Scheme is supposed to replace it.
Right, okay.
It's not quite there yet. It's very early days, but we're hoping that farmers will come along to these roadshows and get all the information they can about how to apply, what they can do, what's there for them, how they can communicate with the Manx Wildlife Trust to achieve what needs to be achieved.
I see.
And
okay.
that they can have any questions they've got answered there.
Okay. So, just to move on to the final part, there was always a couple of fun questions. What books have you read? Any sources of inspiration that you'd recommend to listeners?
Oh gosh, I read all sorts. I honestly read.
I bet you do.
I read all sorts of stuff. I read everything from factual stuff through to absolute trash.
What's the best factual stuff you've read?
Factual stuff.
Who was it by? Do you remember?
Well, in recent times, I've actually, because I like to read a book in the evening before I go to sleep, and in recent times, I've been going back through all the old classics, because my middle daughter is very keen on literature. My husband's mother and stepfather run a book agency, and she used to work for Bloomsbury. So we have a house full of books.
Fantastic.
We've got all sorts of stuff.
Brilliant.
One of my favourite books I read was On the Life of Elizabeth Taylor.
Okay.
I love Elizabeth Taylor. I think she's amazing.
Yeah, she was. How many husbands did she have?
Oh, God, was about seven.
Seven in the end.
Seven, yeah, I think so. One she married twice. Yeah.
Richard Burton.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. You see, but that's what I mean. I kind of it goes all over the place. And I recently read some more George Orwell, Down and Out in London and Paris. And do you know what I really liked about reading George Orwell? That it's really quite a good documentary of what life was like then for people living in abject poverty. And that always strikes a bit of a chord with me, because it's an area of life I think we've got to address. We've got to have a bit more social equality for people. And I always I don't really talk about women's rights. I talk about equal rights, because I think that's what we need. But we need social equality as well.
No. I mean, what you said about your career and how you've shaped it around your children, which is entirely your choice. But if you look at across society, that is typically what happens. The woman compromises her career in order to bring up children. Yeah. And that's fine. Except when you get to retirement, the moments that matter in life means that you are typically going to arrive at a retirement age with a pot that's something like 30 or 40% less than a male equivalent who's worked full time.
Yeah.
So it manifests in lots of ways, but that's just one particular one. And we live longer, of course, typically, demographically.
Yeah.
So we have to make less last longer. So.
Yeah.
That's in itself is
and I think that
challenge.
It is really important that we address those social structures that certainly haven't benefited women. But I think it's understanding that everybody can make a good contribution to society and that you've got to value people for that.
Yeah.
You know, I think everybody needs to be valued for what they do. And that goes from people who sweep the streets. I think the pandemic really sort of highlighted a lot of this, that the people we really, really need are the people that are cleaning up and the people that are keeping things organised and the people that are caring for other people. And women taking on an awful lot of those roles. And in our social structure, historically, they've never been valued.
No. Blame Mesopotamia.
Dawn of civilization.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll change that next week, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your favourite quote? Do you have one?
I don't really have one, to be honest. Probably the one I kind of think about most is change what you cannot accept and accept what you cannot change.
That's good.
Yeah. And my mum always said, always challenge authority.
Right, yeah. Noted, I think. Any new keys, electees. Yeah. Where can people go to learn more about you? There's the Manx NFU website, which is manx-nfu.org, isn't it?
Yeah.
So where else can people go to learn more about the work
Facebook,
you're doing?
we'll hopefully be doing some more updates on Manx farming and food matters.
Yes.
You can always find us at the agricultural shows. Give those a quick promo as well whilst I'm at it. Yes, both agricultural shows and the Food and Drink Festival will have a presence there as well.
That's in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
before the election.
Yes,
Fantastic. And
just before.
Yeah, and the One World charity as well.
And the One World Centre. Yes, Charity Challenge has just started again.
Right.
And it's been very ably run this year by Helen Neal. I'm still on the committee for the One World Centre.
Right. Okay. I'm hoping to do a podcast with Phil Crane.
Oh, fabulous.
At some point in the future.
Yes, Phil's brilliant. And a lot of the work that the One World Centre do is connected around education and information. And they do a lot of work with schools. So they always need support. And,
it's just that's really interesting. Thank you. That's people don't often see the connection between One World and maybe local agricultural interests, but in actual fact,
interestingly enough, the Manx Wildlife Trust, Manx National Farmers Union, and the One World Centre are collaborating a little bit on providing more education in schools about food production, where it comes from, how it affects people's lives.
Yeah.
So that's a really exciting project,
isn't it?
Coming up that I'm going to really enjoy.
Yeah, it's music to my ears anyway. Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on to Island Influences and spending time today. It's been fascinating, and
thank you very much.
Really value your input there. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Island Influencers from Thornton Chartered Financial Planners. To find out more and for useful links, visit thorntonfs.com/podcasts.